Joseph was a secret follower of Jesus Christ. He was a member of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish council. And Joseph was horrified when he learnt that the council had, in his absence, condemned this man to death. He now determined to make one bold move to show his loyalty to his Lord. He would donate the tomb that he was preparing for himself for Jesus to be buried in. So Joseph went to the Roman authorities and asked for the body of Jesus, which was granted. They took him down from the cross. They wrapped him in fine linen, then carried him the short distance from the crucifixion site to the tomb. The Gospels say he was a rich man, also that the tomb was new and that no one had ever been laid in this tomb. We now enter the tomb we have been examining. Inside, the tomb is large. A tomb which only a rich man could afford to own. We pause and survey a corner of the tomb. On this right side are places for two bodies, one at the rear and another a few feet away. On the left-hand side was a room for mourners to weep. Now something here is most interesting. This tomb was measured for a man who expected, of course, one day to lie in it. But this tomb was not used by the person or persons for whom it had been cut out. And you ask, how do we know this? This burial section carved out of the rock to fit one man has clearly been enlarged for somebody else, someone who was taller than the man for whom the tomb had been measured. This does suggest that not the owner, but some other person was laid in this rich man's tomb. There are also indications that this tomb was not even finished. Someone else was interested in the rich man's tomb. The Jewish council hated Jesus so much that they went to the governor and said, "Sir, that deceiver said while he was yet alive, 'After 3 days I will rise again.' Now command that a guard be placed in front of the tomb, lest his disciples come by night and steal the body, and say he is risen from the dead. And that last lie will be worse than the first." So a guard detachment was stationed at the tomb and a Roman seal placed in front of it. This is what it would look like. You notice that on the left side would be a metal peg. On the right side, another metal peg. And across the front, the Roman seal. On October the 20th, 1995, our team measured the distance from the peg hole on the left-hand side of the tomb to the catch flange for the edge of the stone on the right-hand side. And the distance between the two, that is the extreme right and the extreme left, was found to be precisely 13 feet 2 inches. The same size as the round stone discovered at the crucifixion site. It has been calculated that such a stone would weigh close to 14 tons. To move it, what would you first have to do? You would have to take out the metal peg. You see, it would be impossible for anybody, even a group of people, to get that stone moving from a dead stop and break off that peg, they would first have to take it out before they could move that stone. It has been calculated by an engineer that such a metal peg could withstand 60 to 80 tons pressure before it actually snapped off. Just imagine all the materials of 2 brick houses squeezed together, then dropped onto the peg before it would break. Of course, even before that would happen, there would probably be some bending of the metal. It would be totally impossible for anyone to move that stone without first taking out the peg. There is no stone there now. The stone has been moved away. Let me show you the left-hand hole where the peg used to be. Here it is. But wait a moment. What do we have here? Can you see that metal there? What we have, friends, is what's left of a peg, a metal peg that was never taken out of the hole. Instead, it was struck by some colossal force from the right, slightly bent, and sheared off level with the wall, and the stone went away. The peg is evidence. Who was it that did what, humanly speaking, was impossible? Rolled away that stone without taking out the peg. In front of this tomb, there appears to have been cut out of the bedrock a font for baptism by immersion, a first century Christian practice. There is also a squarish foot bath. Foot washing was another early Christian ceremony. Such evidence suggests that the early Christians revered this particular tomb site as special. Let's see the link. Golgotha, Skull Hill. Very close to it we have a crucifixion site surrounded by a first century building. Further away we have a rich man's garden tomb with the seal stone missing. And over at the crucifixion site we have a stone that matches it in size precisely, enclosed in a crucifixion site. Who was it that in the first century of our era considered this site so important as to link the crucifixion site with the burial site nearby in the first century, the time of the early Christian church, the time of the apostles? Who was it that wanted to commemorate something here that was linked to something there? When these discoveries were going on, friends, there came word from a bishop who had the say as to whether the excavation could continue. He passed down the message, "You must cease work." Now, friends, that cave had not been found, if there was one. Ron was a Christian, a man of deep prayer, as were virtually all members of the team. And so, prayers went up. They went something like this: Dear God, if you really do have in mind that we are to find something here to glorify your name, and if this work is to continue, and if that man is going to fight you and hold up this work, will you in some way that is suitable to you remove him so that we can continue the work? By the end of that week, the bishop dropped dead. By the end of the month, his successor gave permission for the work to continue. I tell you, it's a serious thing to stand against the will of God. Some very wonderful things had been found over this time, but still the object of the search had not been achieved. Eventually, all the cliff face had been excavated, and there was nowhere further to go. And still there was no cave found. Over dinner one night, Danny spoke up. "Where do we go now?" "Well," suggested Ron, "why don't we break into the cliff face? It would be hard work. It would involve hammer and chisel, real hard work. But it was decided there was no other option. They could only try and see if there might be something hollow inside." To their relief, it wasn't long before they broke through the rock into the open space. Gradually they enlarged the hole, and behind it there appeared a cave. But if they expected something worthwhile for their pains, it was not to be. It turned out that this cavern was just a small part of an extensive honeycomb of natural caves and tunnels inside the mountain. There would pass 12 months on and off of arduous, heartbreaking toil for seemingly no results. One tunnel was so tight you had to exhale just to wriggle through. Then when you tried to take another breath, the passage was so narrow you could only half inhale again. And there were places with deep drops, 25, 40 feet down. Tunnels not all connected. Many hours were spent chiseling through cave walls, searching for adjacent tunnels. Each time these proved empty. One by one, team members began to lose hope. The owners of the land had granted a permit on condition that Ron restore the land to its original state when the work was done. On one occasion there were just 3 members of the party working. One was inside hacking away at the rock. Another was outside, in the trench, under a bush, for the shade, eating his lunch. And Ron was fiddling with the paper for the radar. Suddenly there was heard a voice from above, up on the earth pile. "God bless you, Ron Wyatt, for what you are doing." Ron looked up, and there was a tall man dressed like an Arab in clothes very much like those of biblical days. Ron knew that nobody was aware of what they were doing, only the members of the team and the antiquities man. Here was a total stranger who not only knew Ron's name but said he knew what they were doing. So Ron began to ply the man with questions. "Do you live around here?" "No." "Are you a tourist then?" "No." "Well, who are you? Where do you come from?" And after a long pause, the stranger replied, "I've just been to South Africa and I'm on my way to the New Jerusalem. God bless you, Ron Wyatt, for what you are doing." He turned and he walked away. Ron left his equipment, and as he was clambering up the earth pile, the team member eating lunch shouted, "I heard every word of that. I didn't see the man. Do you think we've been talking to an angel?" Ron ran after the man. There were workmen nearby. Ron asked them, "Did you see such and such a man who just came down here?" They replied, "Mr. Wyatt, no one came past here." He ran out to the street and asked the Arab hawkers, "Did you see that man?" They replied, "No, Mr. Wyatt, such a person did not come past here." May I state that with such an experience, the team was suddenly inspired to intensify their work. It was the very impetus they needed to keep going.
Have a request for 22-inch 2x4.
And so the work continued inside the tunnel systems. Of course, the physical strain was tremendous. 2 members of the team actually flew home with double pneumonia. The dust, the tightness inside was becoming unbearable. With one young man who always accompanied him inside, Ron continued on this particular afternoon. We'll call this Arab boy Rafat. He was young, about 27 or 28 years of age, and slim. And Rafat was a great help to the team because being so slim, so small, he could squeeze into crevices that might otherwise take hours to widen for the rest of the team to follow. And he could just go in with a torch and look around and see if that area held promise, or he might simply come back and suggest they go the other way. And this would save much time and frustration. So, this particular afternoon, Rafat was up front with Ron, and they were squeezing along. They came to a certain spot and saw a dark cavity ahead. In front of it was a stalactite hanging down. Here's the stub of the stalactite. The stalactite is in our possession as a team. It still retains a sweetish kind of smell. They knocked off the stalactite and Ron said to Rafat, "Crawl in and take a look." In an instant, Rafat tumbled out. "What's in there? What's in there?" he cried. "I'm not going back in there." He was trembling and shaking. In his eyes was sheer, complete and utter terror. Yet, Rafat said he had seen nothing. Whatever his experience, it was stark and real since he left that chamber and the entire cave system, never to return. What was it that Rafat had sensed? Ron would never have given that chamber another look had it not been for Rafat's terror. Now Ron was cautiously excited. He decided to enlarge the hole and had crawled through. He looked at his watch. It was 2 p.m. We are just going to change over the cartridge. Only 18 inches clearance, that's all he had. He lay on his stomach, inching forward with nothing but the flashlight in his hand, into a space that would prove to be a cavern. The beam of light shone forward over the huge pile of rocks. Something shiny caught his eye. He began moving the rocks one at a time. It was slow work. There were several objects in the chamber. These were covered over with black, dry rotted animal skins. Over these were dry rotted wooden timbers. And on top of the timbers were stones. And Ron came along over the stones between them and the ceiling. There was a moment when he caught a glimpse of something under the stones. It shone like gold in the torchlight. He spent some time removing the covering to see what was there. He saw gold moulding comprising an alternating pattern of a bell and a pomegranate. His heart raced. He knew what he was seeing. This was an object from the first temple. Solomon's temple was the table of showbread described in the book of Leviticus. Slowly and painfully he crawled over the rocks to the other side of the chamber. Ahead in the torchlight he glimpsed a black stone case. It had a flat stone top which was cracked completely in two. The smaller section of the cover was moved aside, creating an opening. Ron now knew what was in that stone case. It was now, with that instant realization, that Ron passed out. It was 2:45 p.m. when he came to, a mere 45 minutes after entering the chamber. Later, inserting a long pole through the opening at the top of the stone case, attempts would be made to photograph the Ark. A Polaroid camera was brought in. The photos turned out foggy. A 35mm camera was brought in. The photos turned out foggy. A video camera was brought in. The photos turned out foggy. And Ron concluded that perhaps it was not time for the world to see this yet. In fact, in ancient times, the average person was not permitted to look upon it. Here, Jim Pinkowski, a team member, faithfully reproduces what is actually seen with the eye. I hear someone say, those figures don't look like angels. How do you know they don't? Have you ever seen an angel? Friends, what you are seeing here is what those ancient craftsmen actually made.
Says the psalmist, truth shall spring out of the earth. Can we take that literally now? Is this going to happen soon?
Show you this whole chamber. At times there would be, how many men in here, Dale, at one time? Seven,
7 or 8, 9, 10.
And I'm looking straight up now.
In a few minutes we shall let you know the official reaction of the Israeli authorities. Stay tuned. Several more trips were made to the chamber. Eventually, Ron reported to the authorities what he had found. The immediate reaction was, "Don't tell anybody. Give us time to think what we should do." "But I've already told a few people," confessed Ron. "Well, what have you told them?" asked the antiquities officer. Ron replied, "I've revealed such and such." Realising that what is done, they then ordered Ron not to reveal any more details than he had already revealed. The man who was in charge of the Jerusalem sector of the Antiquities Department at that time, when the find was reported, Dan Bahart, a man who was taught at the Hebrew University and is the author of several books, wanted to see this for himself, and so he put on his old clothes, gear that wouldn't matter if it got torn or dirty, and he came and advanced toward the tunnel system. He had scarcely gone 3 paces toward the entrance when suddenly this strong, fit man collapsed, groaning on the ground. He lay in bed for 2 weeks, unable to move. After that, the man admitted, "My back has never given me trouble before, but I do know this, I'm not going in to try to look at the Ark of the Covenant again." The Israeli authorities do not know how to handle this discovery. The find has made them nervous. I believe there are 2 reasons. The first is political. Some time ago, a permit was granted to some Israelis to undertake an excavation under the Temple Mount, but it was soon reported that workmen had been seen lugging crates into the excavation tunnel. The authorities investigated and found that the tunnel had already penetrated to a spot under the dome of the rock, and explosives were being set in place, presumably to blow up the place. The Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock, together named the Haram al-Sharif, comprise the 3rd most important place for the Muslim people. Sabotage of the site might well provoke an Islamic jihad or holy war. You see, there are militant extremists among the Jews who want to get back the Temple Mount and build a 3rd temple. And if they could lay their hands upon the Ark of the Covenant, which would be considered by them as the most precious object for such a temple, they would feel quite safe in provoking a war to accomplish that aim, if they knew that they had the Ark on their side. And so the Israeli government is very nervous about anyone laying their hands on the Ark or gaining access to it at this time. Government officials now regard this as a critical issue in which the safety of the people must come first. In view of a prospect of a negotiable peace in the Middle East, the present actions of the government are deliberately against any disclosure of what it knows. They have already restricted Israeli religious access to the sensitive Temple Mount above and below ground. The Israeli government desires to maintain good relations with the Arabs. It does not want to disturb the peace with the Arabs. The situation is explosive at any time. You can walk down the street and get blown up by a suicide bomber. You never know what's going to happen. And so this whole issue has become a political hot potato. Archaeology is currently being used as a weapon. It was just 1 week after one of our visits to the site in Israel that Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated, and the government was blaming one of those disaffected extremists. on a visit into the chamber, the torch was run along the ceiling, and there was found to be a crack in the ceiling. The crack was immediately above the crack in the lid of the stone case. The crack came down through the rock, leapt as it were through the air, then started again. Very, very odd. It was decided to investigate the crack in the ceiling. "Let's get a metal tape measure," suggested Ron, "and see if this comes out somewhere." And so, while one team member sat up by the ledge outside, Ron entered the chamber and began to push the rigid metal tape up through the earthquake crack in the ceiling. Up through the rock it went. It came out at the left-hand side of the elevated crosshole. The crack extended through 20 feet, 6 metres, of solid rock. When Jesus died on the cross, he did not die of crucifixion.